The grease was popping when she pulled the bread from the bag. No measuring cup, no recipe card, just 2 hands and whatever the pantry still held. Those sandwiches fed families through decades most cookbooks pretend never happened. Here are 30 cheap vintage sandwiches we stupidly stopped making and deeply regret. Your grandmother made the banana and mayonnaise sandwich the same way every time. Ripe banana sliced lengthwise, a thick spread of Duke's mayo, 2 pieces of the softest white bread in the house. In Southern kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, this was as common as sweet tea. The combination sounds wrong to modern ears, but the creamy tang of mayo against the sweetness of ripe banana was something close to perfect. It cost almost nothing. A single banana ran about 2 cents during the Depression, and mayo stretched across every meal. Dale Earnhardt Jr. still talks about eating them, but he describes them the way you describe something from another world. You either grew up with it or you didn't. And if you didn't, nobody could explain it. The woman who made yours is probably gone now. The sandwich left when she did. Before deli counters became a daily stop, there was the Underwood deviled ham can, small, white paper label, red devil logo, and a pull tab that required more wrist strength than any child had. The William Underwood Company started canning this spiced ham paste in 1868 out of New England, making it one of the oldest trademarked food products in American history. Your mother mixed it with a fork, just the ham, yellow mustard, maybe a scrape of mayo, and spread it across white bread so fast you barely saw the knife move. Through the 40s and 50s, that little can sat in every pantry, next to the Vienna sausages and the saltines. The flavor was sharp, peppery, salty, the kind of taste that points you to a specific kitchen. Kids who carried those sandwiches in wax paper can still describe the smell when they peeled it open at the cafeteria table. Most of them can tell you exactly who made it. She buttered the bread first, always. Then the sugar, white, granulated, poured from the bag and pressed into the butter with the back of a spoon until the crystals caught. The butter and sugar sandwich was the after-school secret of every kid who grew up where the grocery money ran thin by Thursday. Nobody called it a recipe, you just knew. The crunch of sugar against soft bread, the way it dissolved on your tongue, the faint salt of butter underneath, that was the reward for making it through another day. It showed up in mining towns and mill villages during the Depression, and it never really left. Through the 50s and 60s, kids in Appalachia, the rural South, and factory neighborhoods from Detroit to Pittsburgh still came home to this. Some used brown sugar, some added cinnamon, some just used whatever bread was going stale because waste was something those kitchens refused. In every small-town grocery from the 1940s through the 70s, there was a tub of Bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store Bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of Bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, pre-packaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that Bologna by hand. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. You could smell a Liverwurst sandwich from across the cafeteria, that dense mineral scent announcing itself before you opened the wax paper. Liverwurst and raw onion on rye was a deli standard from the 1940s through the 70s, common as pastrami in neighborhoods where German immigrants had settled. The sausage was soft enough to spread, ground from pork liver with black pepper, marjoram, and allspice, sliced thick at the counter. You ate it on dark rye with spicy brown mustard and onion rings sharp enough to water your eyes. In the Midwest, sweet pickles went on top. In the Northeast, dill. Either way, it was a working man's lunch, filling, cheap, strong enough to carry you through the afternoon. Boar's Head stopped producing it entirely in 2024. The old German delis that sliced it fresh are closing one by one. If your father ate liverwurst, you remember the smell. You probably never made one yourself. Nobody under 50 has heard of the egg and olive sandwich, but mention it to a woman who attended a church potluck before 1970 and watch her face change. Chopped green olives folded into creamy egg salad, the brine cutting through the richness of yolk, made this a fixture at ladies' luncheons and covered dish suppers through the 40s and 50s. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with a fork, a handful of manzanilla olives, mayonnaise, a dash of paprika. It went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, arranged with the kind of precision that said presentation was its own pride. Jars of stuffed olives cost pennies, and every kitchen had one. The sandwich disappeared when formal gatherings stopped and convenience foods took over. Nobody killed it. The world just moved too fast for crustless triangles. Cold baked beans mashed between two slices of bread, that was a factory worker's lunch in every mill town from Fall River to Flint. British immigrants brought the habit to American shores, and it settled into the lunch pails of men who worked 12-hour shifts and needed something that held together in a tin box until noon. The beans were Saturday night's leftovers, thick with molasses and salt pork remnants, scooped cold onto buttered bread and pressed flat. Sometimes a tomato slice if the garden was producing, sometimes a leaf of lettuce, mostly just beans and bread. A 1929 sandwich cookbook recommended them mashed smooth with mayonnaise and chopped onion for variety, and dozens of factory towns had their own versions, some with a drizzle of vinegar, some with a smear of mustard across the top slice. The taste was sweet, salty, dense, the kind of lunch that sat heavy in your stomach and kept you standing through the shift. When the factories closed and lunch counters replaced pails, the baked bean sandwich quietly left the table. In the 1930s, two things sat in nearly every American pantry: a jar of peanut butter and a jar of mayonnaise. Someone put them together on bread, and the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich became a survival staple that lasted decades. The richness of peanut butter against the tang of mayo creates something unexpectedly balanced, almost savory, with enough fat and protein to carry a body through hard work. Skippy hit shelves in '33. Miracle Whip arrived the same year, and both gave families affordable staples that stretched across every meal. Kids ate these 5 days running because there was nothing else, and complaining about food was something you did not do. The sandwich held through the 50s, mostly in the South, where Duke's mayo and thick peanut butter on white bread was as ordinary as breathing. It slipped away not because anyone turned against it. It just got buried under the choices that came after the lean years ended. If peanut butter and mayo was about stretching what you had, the Welsh rarebit was about turning almost nothing into something that made you forget you were poor. Sharp cheddar melted into a sauce with beer, Worcestershire, dry mustard, and cayenne, poured hot over thick toast and browned under the broiler until it bubbled. That was lunch at every diner counter from the 20s through the 70s. The name came from Britain, a working-class joke. Welsh families who couldn't afford rabbit ate melted cheese and called it by the name of what they wished they had. It crossed the Atlantic and became a fixture of American lunch counters and hotel cafes where a block of cheddar and a bottle of beer fed the whole table for pennies. Campbell's even sold canned cheddar soup that housewives poured over toast and called rarebit. The real sauce took 5 minutes: flour, butter, cheese, liquid, seasoning, but tasted like an hour of work. When fast food came and meat got cheap, diners dropped it for turkey clubs. The hot, messy beauty of rarebit didn't survive the drive-thru. They called it the emergency sandwich because that is exactly what it was. The meal you made when nothing was left and someone still needed to eat. A 1920 recipe from the calendar of sandwiches and beverages laid it out. Hard-boiled eggs chopped with whatever pickle you had, bound with mustard and peanut butter, thinned with vinegar if the paste was too thick. Every ingredient was shelf-stable and already in the cupboard. The sandwich belonged to the 30s the way bread lines did. Born when families opened their pantries and saw almost nothing. You made it because the alternative was sending your kids out with empty hands. Egg and peanut butter and pickle sounds strange now, but strange was a luxury nobody could afford. You ate what was there. The recipe survived in church pamphlets and Depression-era cookbooks passed along by women who understood that feeding a family on nothing was its own kind of skill. The first thing you noticed was the color. Pink Bologna studded with bright green circles of pimiento stuffed olive, sliced thin at the deli counter. Olive loaf was a lunchbox favorite from the late 60s into the 70s when supermarket delis carried cold cuts nobody asks for anymore. The loaf blended beef and pork with coriander, mace, and black pepper, whole manzanilla olives pressed in before cooking. Kids ate it on white bread with yellow mustard, salty, briny, with a sweetness from the pimiento you didn't expect. Oscar Mayer made one. Boar's Head made one. Both discontinued it. Dietz and Watson and Eckrich still produce it regionally, but you have to know where to look. If your mother packed olive loaf, you either loved it or traded it at the cafeteria. Either way, you haven't seen it since. Beef tongue on rye with horseradish and pickle was the most expensive sandwich at Mid-City Delicatessen in Manhattan during the 50s. 75 cents, top tier, same price as turkey. Jewish and German delis displayed whole tongues in their cases through the 60s, sliced to order by men who knew exactly how thin to cut. The meat was braised for hours until tender, peeled, and chilled, and the texture was unlike any other cut, silky, rich, with a depth that regular roast beef couldn't touch. You ate it cold on dark rye with horseradish sharp enough to clear your sinuses, a half-sour pickle on the side. It was whole animal butchery at its finest. A cut nobody wanted, turned into something people paid premium prices for. Katz's Deli in New York still serves it. But most people now would rather not think about where their sandwich came from. That squeamishness killed a craft that took real skill. If the tongue sandwich required a butcher's skill, this one required nothing but nerve. Peanut butter and dill pickle on white bread, the sandwich that sounds like a dare but tastes like a discovery. It came out of the Depression when lunch counters paired whatever was cheap and shelf-stable, and the combination turned out to work in a way nobody expected. The New York Times called it a thrifty and unacknowledged American classic. The acid of vinegar brine cuts through the fat, the crunch of pickle breaks the density, and the whole thing hits a sweet, sour, salty balance that makes you take a second bite before you've understood the first. Pregnant women kept it alive for decades. The craving is practically a cliché. But this was a pantry staple long before anyone tied it to pregnancy. You don't need to be craving anything. You just need to trust the people who came before you. Of all the sandwiches that disappeared, prune butter might be the one that deserved a better reputation. Stewed prunes mashed into a dark, sticky paste and spread across day-old bread. That was a school lunch in the 40s and 50s, packed by mothers who knew dried fruit was cheap, filling, and wouldn't spoil in a tin pail. Some added cinnamon or a smear of butter to soften the intensity. Some mixed in chopped walnuts for texture. The result was dense and sweet, almost like jam, but earthier, with a chewiness that made it feel like real food instead of candy. Kids traded these away at the cafeteria table faster than anything else in the lunchbox. Prune had already become a punchline by the 50s, and no child wanted to be caught eating one. The mothers who packed them knew the nutritional value and didn't care about the jokes. They were feeding their kids on pennies. The kids who threw them away wished now they'd paid attention. Crispy Chow meant noodles on a hamburger bun drowned in brown gravy with pork and vegetables. The chow mein sandwich sounds invented, but it fed factory workers in Fall River, Massachusetts for 40 years. Chinese immigrants in the late 1800s opened restaurants in the mill town and created this to introduce their food to European workers who understood sandwiches but not chopsticks. Anthropologist Imogen Lim explained that the bun made Chinese cuisine accessible, a familiar frame around unfamiliar flavors. By the 50s, it had spread to Nathan's Famous in Brooklyn and across New England. The classic order was the sandwich, French fries, and orange soda. Emeril Lagasse, a Fall River native, later developed his own version as homage. When factories closed and fast food moved in, the chow mein sandwich retreated to a handful of Massachusetts restaurants where it quietly survives. A relic of a moment when two cultures met over a lunch counter and built something neither would have made alone. There was a type of father, Midwestern usually, often a veteran, who built his Braunschweiger sandwich with a quiet ritual that bordered on ceremony. Pumpernickel or dark rye, toasted, a thick smear of the smoked liverwurst, pink, gray, and dense, straight from the tube, spicy brown mustard in overlapping lines, a slice of raw onion, maybe tomato if the garden had one. Braunschweiger came from the German town of Brunswick, and by the time it reached America, it had become a Midwest dad staple, the sandwich their wives tolerated and their kids refused to try. The smell was unmistakable, pork liver and caraway and smoke filling the kitchen at 6 in the morning while coffee brewed. Oscar Mayer still makes it, but the stores that stock it are fewer each year. If you grew up watching your father eat this sandwich, eyes closed, completely content, you carry that image somewhere specific. He probably never asked if you wanted one. He already knew. The sardine sandwich was a deli staple nobody under 40 remembers ordering. Canned sardines on rye with raw onion, spicy mustard, and a squeeze of lemon. A working man's lunch at delis from Brooklyn to San Francisco through the 50s and 60s. The fish came packed in oil or mustard sauce, rich in protein, cheap, and shelf-stable for years. Immigrant families from Portugal, Italy, and Scandinavia had eaten sardines on bread for generations before it appeared on an American menu. You opened the can with a key that wound back the lid, and the smell announced what you were eating to everyone in the room. Sardine eaters didn't apologize. They ate with the confidence of people who knew good food didn't need to look pretty. The sandwich vanished from restaurants but held on in kitchens where old men still eat them alone at the counter, the way their fathers did, without a word. Years before deli meat came sealed in plastic, ham salad was ground fresh every morning behind the counter. Leftover ham, the end of a holiday roast, scraps too small to slice, went through the grinder with celery, sweet pickles, hard-boiled egg, and mayonnaise, turning remnants into a spread worth sitting down for. A single ham bone produced enough to feed a family for 3 days. The sandwich was a deli fixture through the 50s and 60s, scooped onto bread with lettuce and tomato. Food safety fears killed it. Concerns about mayo at room temperature scared a generation away from anything served from a bowl behind glass. Pre-packaged alternatives replaced it, sealed and sterile and tasting like nothing at all. The women who ground that ham every morning made leftovers taste like a first course. That skill went quiet when they did. James Beard, the man who wrote the book on American cooking, literally, loved almost nothing more than a sweet onion sandwich. Thick slices of Bermuda or Vidalia onion, layered on buttered white bread with mayonnaise, salt, and black pepper. That was it. No meat, no cheese, no distraction. He wrote about it with the kind of passion most chefs reserve for truffles, insisting the onion had to be sweet enough to eat raw and the bread soft enough to compress under a gentle press. The sandwich had a small, devoted audience through the 50s and 60s, mostly among people who took beards seriously and understood that simplicity was its own mastery. It never went mainstream, the raw onion, and the breath it left behind ensured that. But for the people who made it, nothing else came close. Beard died in 1985, and the sandwich barely outlived him. The kind of cook who trusted a single raw ingredient to carry an entire meal is rarer now than a Vidalia onion in January. In Massachusetts in the 60s, the Fluffernutter got so popular in school cafeterias that the state legislature passed laws limiting how often it could appear on lunch menus. Marshmallow fluff on one slice of white bread, peanut butter on the other pressed together, that was the recipe, and kids treated it like dessert disguised as lunch. Fluff had been manufactured in Lynn, Massachusetts, since 1920, and the pairing took off when Durkee printed the recipe on jars in the 60s. The combination was sugar and fat and protein, sticky enough to glue your mouth shut and sweet enough to erase whatever happened at recess. Outside New England, most people have never heard of it. Inside New England, saying you've never had one marks you as an outsider faster than mispronouncing Worcester. The Fluffernutter belongs to a specific place and a specific childhood. If yours wasn't one of them, you missed something the recipe alone can't recreate. There is a window, maybe 3 weeks in July, maybe 4 if the summer is kind, when the tomatoes come in ripe enough to make the tomato and mayonnaise sandwich the way it was meant to be made. Soft white bread, Duke's mayo spread thick on both slices, tomatoes sliced heavy and still warm from the garden, salt and black pepper, and nothing else. In the South, this sandwich was a seasonal ritual from the 1940s straight through the 80s, eaten standing over the sink because the juice ran down your wrist before you could catch it. You didn't buy tomatoes for this. You grew them, or your neighbor did, or somebody at church brought a bag. The supermarket kind won't work. Too firm, too pale, bred for shipping instead of flavor. The sandwich lives and dies on that tomato, and when the season ends, so does the sandwich until next year. That patience, waiting all winter for something you could only have in summer, is a kind of discipline most kitchens have stopped practicing. In 1926, Chef Fred K. Schmidt at the Brown Hotel in Louisville created an open-faced sandwich that turned leftover turkey into something worth dressing up for. Sliced roast turkey on white toast, blanketed in Mornay sauce, butter, flour, milk, and Parmesan, topped with bacon and broiled tomato, then slid under the flame until it blistered. The hot brown was born as late-night supper for hotel guests tired of ham and eggs, and it became the signature of a city that already knew how to eat. The Mornay was the trick, a French mother sauce adapted for a southern kitchen, rich enough to make plain turkey taste like celebration. Through the 40s and 50s, restaurants across Louisville served their versions, but the Brown Hotel original stayed the standard. The dish faded as open-faced sandwiches fell from fashion, and fast casual dining replaced restaurants that broiled cheese sauce to order. The hot brown survives in Louisville. Everywhere else, it's a name nobody recognizes. If the hot brown was a sandwich that dressed up, potted meat was the one that never pretended. Canned, shelf-stable, costing pennies, sold in tins small enough to fit in a shirt pocket. Armour and Libby's made versions that sat on pantry shelves across Appalachia and the rural South for decades. The paste was ground beef and pork mixed with salt and mechanically separated chicken, spread on saltine crackers or white bread by men who worked outdoors and needed calories that traveled without refrigeration. The taste was salty, soft, faintly metallic, an acquired flavor that you either accepted or you didn't. Nobody called it good. But in the hollows and the hill towns and the places where the nearest grocery was an hour's drive on unpaved roads, potted meat fed people who had nothing else on the shelf. The families who ate it didn't write about it or put it on any menu. It was just there, the way bread was there, the way hunger was there, the way the mountains themselves were there, something you lived with and didn't question. Canned pineapple rings between slices of American cheese on white bread, grilled or cold, it didn't matter. This was a sandwich that existed because the 1950s believed anything canned and tropical could be made into a meal. The combination sounds impossible, but the sweetness of the pineapple against the salt and melt of processed cheese created something kids actually asked for. It showed up at church picnics and school lunches and kitchen tables where mothers were trying to stretch a grocery list that didn't include meat. Canned pineapple was cheap and kept forever. American cheese was the same. Together, they became a sandwich that nobody documented and everybody remembers. It faded when fresh ingredients became easier to get and processed cheese stopped being the only option. But the women who made it weren't confused. They were solving a problem with what they had, the way they solved every problem. The pineapple and cheese sandwich wasn't strange. It was resourceful. The people who call it strange never had to feed 4 kids on $3. Before the Denver omelet ruled breakfast menus, there was the Denver sandwich, scrambled eggs with diced ham, green pepper, and onion, pressed between 2 slices of bread and eaten for lunch at diners from Colorado to the East Coast. Railroad workers supposedly created it as a portable meal, named after the city where it gained traction in the early 1900s. By the 40s and 50s, it was a lunch counter standard, cheap, filling, hot, and assembled in minutes by short-order cooks who could crack eggs with one hand while flipping the ham with the other. The sandwich version disappeared by the 70s, though nobody can explain exactly why. The open-faced breakfast version survived, the omelet survived, but the simple act of putting that filling between bread slices, the thing that made it a working lunch instead of a sit-down breakfast, vanished. Something about the speed of those lunch counter cooks, the sizzle of the griddle, the way they slid the plate across the counter without looking, that rhythm is gone now too. During the worst years of the Depression, when ham was a luxury that most families couldn't reach, someone ground up grocery store Bologna with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickles, diced onion, and mayonnaise and called it mock ham salad. The word mock tells you everything. It was an imitation built from whatever cost less, and the women who made it never pretended otherwise. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were feeding their families with pride on a budget that allowed no pride at all. The recipe spread through newspaper columns, church cookbooks, and handwritten cards passed between neighbors. By the mid-40s, when the economy recovered and real ham became affordable again, mock ham salad should have disappeared. It didn't. Not entirely. Some families kept making it because the taste had become its own thing, separate from what it was pretending to be. The children who grew up on it didn't know it was a substitute until someone told them. By then, it was just what their mother made. The frosted sandwich loaf was the most ambitious thing a woman could bring to a bridge club meeting in the 1950s. A whole loaf of bread, sliced lengthwise, layered with egg salad, deviled ham, chicken salad, and pimento cheese, then frosted in whipped cream cheese and mayonnaise, decorated with cucumber slices and olive halves, and sliced like a cake. It came from the Swedish smörgåstårta tradition and landed in American living rooms where it became the centerpiece of baby showers, card parties, and ladies' luncheons from Minnesota to the Carolinas. Making one took hours. You had to plan the fillings, slice the bread without tearing it, layer everything evenly, and frost it smooth enough to fool the eye into thinking it was dessert. The women who made these weren't showing off. They were demonstrating a competence that their world measured in exactly this way, by what you could produce from a kitchen with your own hands. Nobody makes them anymore. The gatherings that required them don't exist. The lettuce and mayonnaise sandwich is the one nobody wants to talk about. Iceberg lettuce, mayonnaise, salt and pepper, white bread. That was the whole thing. Depression-era cookbooks listed it as an economical lunch, and homemaking magazines through the 50s still called it refreshing. But the truth underneath the polite language was simpler. This was the sandwich you made when there was genuinely nothing else. No meat, no cheese, no eggs. Just the crack of cold lettuce and the tang of mayo on bread a day old. The women who served it didn't call it hardship. They set the plate down and ate the same thing without comment. That silence was its own grace, the refusal to let your kids see what you were carrying. The lettuce and mayo sandwich was never about the lettuce. It was about the hands that made it when nothing was left. If you've ever opened a can of sardines, you know it has a distinct, strong flavor, one that isn't for everyone. But during the Great Depression, a canned sardine and mayo sandwich was a common lunch that stretched a tight budget. Sardines were affordable, packed with protein, and could sit on the shelf for ages. They weren't just easy to find, they were easy to store. The fish was mashed up with mayonnaise, often with a little bit of onion for extra bite, then slathered between slices of bread. Though the flavor might have been an acquired taste, it was a filling meal that kept hunger at bay. And with the mayo adding creaminess, it was surprisingly comforting. While sardines may not be the most glamorous fish, they certainly played an important role in feeding families during tough times. You might think this sandwich is a strange mix, but it's actually a great way to get protein when the pantry's running low. And while sardines gave you that fishy flavor, it was about to get a little more sweet and creamy with the next sandwich on our list. Sardine and mustard sandwiches are as basic as they sound and much better than you might initially give them credit for. Be realistic and think about a post-Depression era America where a lot of neighborhoods and homes were still reeling from the effects. Dollars could buy a bit more and went back to their usual strength, but everything was a bit touch and go for a while, and dishes like sardine and mustard sandwiches were the cure. Even more attractive than the taste was the price of this beauty, because for about $1.50 you had yourself a solid meal. Many labor workers, like your friendly neighborhood forklift or dock workers, might remember eating these during their lunch breaks. People would usually spice it up with other vegetables, toppings, and peppers to make a proper feast out of a cheap thrill. And we would like to join the fun too. Ketchup sandwiches were the kind of meal that no child forgot, for better or worse. When meat ran out and budgets were stretched thin, a slice of bread slathered with ketchup stood in as lunch or even dinner. Some families used both slices of bread while others folded one slice over to save even more. The tangy sweetness of the ketchup soaked into the bread, making it both soft and messy, but it filled stomachs when little else was available. Packed into lunchboxes, it was often eaten at school by children whose parents had no choice but to make something out of nothing. Housewives knew it was not glamorous, but it provided energy and flavor without cost. In homes where condiments were one of the only things left in the pantry, this sandwich represented survival and resilience. It became a quiet staple of poorer families who had to get creative with what they had on hand. Though rarely spoken of today, ketchup sandwiches reveal how little could be stretched into just enough during lean times. The mashed potato sandwich is one of those unassuming comfort foods that became a staple for many families during hard times. When there wasn't much in the pantry, leftover mashed potatoes provided a quick and filling solution. The sandwich itself was simple. Just a hearty serving of mashed potatoes spread between two slices of bread. While it might sound basic, the potatoes brought both substance and satisfaction, especially when other food options were limited. The mashed potatoes could be enhanced with black pepper or a drizzle of gravy if you were lucky enough to have it, adding a little extra flavor to what was essentially a very simple dish. The real beauty of the mashed potato sandwich was its versatility. If you had no other ingredients, it could still make a fulfilling meal. It was also a great way to use up leftovers from a previous meal, turning a side dish into the main course. This sandwich wasn't about gourmet flavors or complex ingredients, it was about being resourceful and making the most out of what you had. For many, it was an affordable, easy way to stretch meals further, especially when money was tight. The mashed potato sandwich might not have been the most glamorous option, but it was a meal that served its purpose well. And while it might seem simple, the next sandwich on our list takes leftovers and transforms them into a surprisingly hearty option. Equally offensive to most conservative taste palates were pineapple and cheese sandwiches. As of 2024, it is a well-established fact that the West and pineapples have had a very troubled relationship. Pineapples try their best for America, and America acts like an alcoholic husband that cannot notice his wife even on their anniversary. Back in the 70s, this was still a new culinary ground people were treading, just like ham and banana sandwiches. What they found was that it did not have the potential to go very mainstream, but it could grow itself a strong, loyal, and niche following. Most fans of this sandwich were in Hawaii, but in surrounding states, the trend took off moderately successfully. People loved the overly sweet and oddly comforting sensation of the sandwich, and we can see why. Pineapple and cheese sandwiches sound oddly delicious if you really think about it. Powdered milk spread sandwiches reflected the struggles of homes that relied on powdered milk as a staple during lean years. Housewives would reconstitute the powder with water, stir in sugar or syrup, and create a sweet paste that could be spread onto bread. It was not glamorous, but it was filling and provided children with energy when other options were scarce. Powdered milk was cheaper than fresh milk and lasted longer in the pantry, making it a dependable ingredient. The spread was creamy, lightly sweet, and easy to prepare, though it never replaced the taste of real butter or cheese. For families with little money, it was better than going without. Children often saw it as a treat because of the added sweetness, while mothers saw it as survival. This sandwich carried the memory of thrift and resilience, showing how much homemakers relied on creativity to keep everyone fed. Powdered milk spread sandwiches have been forgotten, but they remain a quiet testament to making do with very little. If you've never tried a raw onion sandwich, it's one of those meals that'll stick with you, for better or worse. Sliced raw onions, slathered with a bit of mustard or mayo, tucked between two slices of bread. It wasn't gourmet, but it was a working man's lunch that packed a punch. Onions were cheap, easy to store, and filled you up. The mustard or mayo added some tang and creaminess, but the star of the show was the onion. Not only was it a strong-flavored, inexpensive option, but it was also a great way to keep your hunger at bay until your next meal. Though its pungent scent often lingered long after the meal was finished, it didn't matter when food was scarce. For many families, raw onion sandwiches were a quick fix that provided the sustenance they needed to get through the day. But if you think this is as bold as it gets, just wait until you hear about the next sandwich. No one does comfort food better than Americans, and the iconic potato chips and cheese sandwich is proof. People would grab cheddar or mozzarella cheese and a packet of Frito-Lays or a can of Pringles and get busy at the table but not in the kitchen. Reason being, this was one of those 10-minute dishes that took absolutely no effort or time to make, like instant noodles. Barbecue-flavored chips would be preferred, because they added a secondary flavor, but all kinds were used and the crunch was just to die for. In the 1970s, chips like Pringles were getting more and more popular in America, and that made it even easier for this to take center stage. What would follow in the decades after was a growing concern for health, and people stopped making their favorite potato chips and cheese sandwiches, but we would love a 70s plate. Grape jelly and cream cheese sandwiches combined two pantry staples into something that felt like a treat even when money was short. Housewives would spread cream cheese on one slice of bread, grape jelly on the other, and press them together for a quick, sweet, and tangy sandwich. The cream cheese gave it richness while the jelly provided bright sweetness, making it more filling than just jelly alone. Children loved the colorful combination, and mothers appreciated how easy it was to prepare. It was cheap, cheerful, and adaptable, often using whatever flavor of jelly was available in the pantry. Some families even toasted the bread to add crunch, making it feel fancier than it really was. This sandwich reflected how homemakers of the 1950s found ways to stretch food into something special, even when it was born from necessity. Grape jelly and cream cheese sandwiches may not be common anymore, but they once carried the comfort of home and the satisfaction of making do with what was available. The fried Bologna and mustard sandwich is one of those classic comfort foods that speaks to simplicity and practicality. A true Southern favorite, this sandwich became a staple in many households during tough times when meat was scarce and budgets were tight. Bologna, a processed meat that was inexpensive and easy to find, was fried until it curled up, creating crispy, golden edges that added texture and flavor to the sandwich. The Bologna's richness was perfectly complemented by a generous smear of mustard, which added a tangy zing that cut through the greasy richness of the fried meat. It wasn't a sophisticated meal, but it was satisfying, hearty, and filled you up without costing much. The best part was how easy it was to prepare. A quick fry on the stove and a spread of mustard, and you had yourself a meal in no time. The Bologna was affordable and could be bought in bulk, making it a practical choice for families trying to stretch their food dollar. While it may not have been gourmet, the fried Bologna and mustard sandwich provided a familiar, comforting taste that many still remember fondly today. It wasn't about fancy ingredients or elaborate cooking methods. It was about making something hearty and satisfying with what was available. And while this classic combo hits the spot, the next sandwich on our list takes another humble ingredient and turns it into something surprisingly delicious. Pickles come in pairs with olives, so it is only right to mention cream cheese and olive sandwiches next. Cream cheese was an ingredient that was already a staple in many American homes because of its popularity in desserts around the 1970s. Olives are, well, olives, and if you do not have a bottle always ready to go, you need to reevaluate your grocery shopping list for this month. Mixing the two made both substantially better, like those power-ups Iron Man gets whenever he puts on a bulkier suit. If people felt really fancy, they would put the olives on the stove for a while and have them fried. Not only was it great on its own, but people also did not stop at just frying. Both of them made for really awesome toppings on meat-based sandwiches. We would not mind seeing more olives on our plate today for sure. They are a classic we feel work in any era. Graham cracker peanut butter sandwiches were a creative way to turn a dessert cracker into a dependable meal. Housewives would crumble or crush graham crackers into peanut butter, creating a thick, sticky paste that stretched further than peanut butter alone. Spread on bread, this filling provided both sweetness and protein, making it practical and satisfying. Children loved the sweet crunch, while parents valued how far one jar of peanut butter could go when mixed with the crackers. It was especially useful when peanut butter supplies were limited, since the crackers bulked out the mixture without losing flavor. The sandwich was heavy, chewy, and packed with energy, perfect for keeping kids going through the school day or fathers through long hours of work. It did not look fancy, but it filled stomachs and kept families fed when choices were limited. Graham cracker peanut butter sandwiches are rarely remembered today, yet in the 1950s they showed how even snack foods could be adapted into survival meals. The apple and mayo sandwich might seem like a strange combination, but it was a surprisingly popular choice during tough times when ingredients were scarce and creativity in the kitchen was key. Sliced apples, typically tart varieties, were paired with creamy mayonnaise between slices of bread. The sweetness of the apples contrasted with the rich, tangy mayo, creating a unique and unexpected flavor profile. It wasn't the type of sandwich you would find in any deli, but it became a go-to option for those looking for something quick and different. The apples, which were relatively inexpensive and often readily available, provided a bit of freshness and texture, while the mayo added a comforting creaminess that tied the whole thing together. The apple and mayo sandwich was especially popular during times of rationing or when fresh produce was hard to come by, offering a rare chance to enjoy a sweet, crunchy bite. While it wasn't a culinary masterpiece, it was a meal that worked with what was available, perfect for those on tight budgets. The sandwich wasn't fancy, but it had an undeniable charm. For many, it was an odd but delicious treat that felt like a luxury in a world where simple ingredients were used to make the most of every meal. And if you thought the apple and mayo sandwich was unexpected, just wait until the next sandwich, where another quirky combination takes center stage with a surprising flavor twist. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like, and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept. And no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try-everything itch would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and farmers market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? Maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. Hash brown sandwiches were a hearty, filling option for families who needed something substantial without spending on meat. Housewives would grate potatoes, fry them in a skillet until golden and crisp, then press them between slices of buttered bread. The result was carb on carb, heavy and satisfying, especially after a long day of labor. The sandwich was warm, greasy, and comforting, often eaten for breakfast or as a quick lunch. It had the same appeal as fried potato cakes but was easier to carry and served as finger food for children. The potatoes provided energy while the bread stretched the portion further. Sometimes onions were grated into the potatoes for extra flavor, but even without them, the hash brown sandwich was a reliable filler. It reflected the ingenuity of families who could take one cheap staple and turn it into something more than the sum of its parts. Though it may sound excessive today, in the 1950s this was simply practical cooking. Hash brown sandwiches were proof that even humble ingredients could create something hearty. The lard and salt sandwich is one of those meals that perfectly embodies the ingenuity and resilience of families during the Great Depression, when food was scarce and every penny had to stretch. It was as simple as it sounds, just bread, lard, and a generous sprinkle of salt. The lard, which was a cheap and readily available source of fat, provided the sandwich with richness and moisture, while the salt helped enhance the flavor, making it more palatable. While it may not have been fancy, the lard and salt sandwich was a practical and filling option when other food was out of reach. Bread was often the most affordable ingredient, and lard was something many households had on hand, especially those who lived on farms where pigs were raised for their meat. This sandwich wasn't about gourmet dining, it was about making do with what was available. Despite the lack of variety, it kept hunger at bay and provided some much-needed energy during a time when food options were limited. It was a meal that could be whipped up quickly and was surprisingly satisfying. Though it may seem unappealing today, the lard and salt sandwich was an essential part of survival for many families. It's a reminder of how people used their resourcefulness to make meals out of the most basic ingredients. And while lard and salt might have filled many bellies, the next sandwich on our list brings together a different combination of simple ingredients to create a surprisingly satisfying meal. A basic two-ingredient combo like meat spreads and cheese would continue making their mark with dishes like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. Salami itself was something that Italian-American communities heavily popularized in America around the early 1900s. Restaurants would take the trend and turn it into a surefire facet of American cooking in the 70s with easy and accessible ideas like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. If it works in restaurants, then the next step to making it a long-lasting memory is to make it simple enough for people to eat at home. Cream cheese, some salami, and white bread understood the assignment perfectly, and despite fading away later on, were a beloved sandwich. If you had any Italian family or were in a primarily European neighborhood, you could definitely expect to catch a whiff of these around the block. Maybe cheeses used to be stronger then? Either way, we would love to try this sandwich from the 1970s. Turnip slice sandwiches were a simple way to add crunch and freshness without paying for expensive fillings. Housewives would peel turnips, slice them thinly, sprinkle with salt, and press them between bread slices. The result was sharp, crisp, and refreshing, offering a flavor somewhere between radish and cabbage. It was inexpensive and used a vegetable that grew well in many backyards, making it accessible to rural families. These sandwiches were not luxurious, but they provided texture and bulk when little else was available. Some versions included a thin spread of butter to soften the sharpness, but often the turnip was eaten plain. For many families, this was a reminder that survival meant working with whatever was on hand, even if it seemed humble. Children might not have been thrilled, but adults valued the practicality. Turnip slice sandwiches may sound unusual today, yet in the 1950s they were just another example of stretching resources and ensuring nothing went to waste. They embodied thrift in its simplest form. When the budget was tight and even jam or jelly was out of reach, butter and sugar sandwiches came to the rescue. It was as simple as it sounds, a thick layer of butter spread on white bread, then topped with a generous sprinkle of sugar. For many, this became the go-to treat, especially during the Depression. It was sweet, satisfying, and didn't require much in terms of ingredients. The butter added richness, and the sugar gave it a touch of sweetness, making it feel like a real dessert, even if it was just a way to fill the stomach when times were tough. The best part? It was incredibly cheap to make, and you didn't have to go hunting for expensive ingredients. Families would often have this as a snack or even as a light dessert to end the day. Despite how simple it seems, there's something comforting about its humble sweetness. But as simple as butter and sugar may be, it's about to get even simpler with the next sandwich on our list. Spam and pineapple sandwiches, on the other hand, are a Hawaiian invention that makes some stomachs less audible. On the other hand, if you are anything like us, then maybe the blend of spices, fruits, and canned pork and ham will create a unique flavor trip for you. Spam and pineapple sandwiches in the state of Hawaii would usually be accompanied with things like mango slices or mango chutney, peppers, chili pastes, and fresh coleslaw. All of this really elevated the dish and gave it a strong identity to pull from when it was making impressions on people for the first time in the 70s, and most were good ones. While pineapples are eternally hated in America, this is one mix of different foods that a lot of citizens could get in line for, and that is why we are sad to see this one gone. Celery salt and butter sandwiches were among the simplest yet most practical of the poor man's sandwiches. Soft bread was buttered generously, then dusted with celery salt to add a punch of flavor. It was inexpensive, fast to prepare, and required only 2 ingredients that many households already had on hand. The taste was salty, savory, and comforting, making it a reliable filler for children's snacks or quick lunches. Rural homes in particular embraced it because celery salt was cheap and long-lasting, and butter could be stretched thinly. It may not have looked impressive, but it satisfied hunger and kept families going when options were limited. Housewives valued the straightforward nature of the recipe, which was as quick as it was thrifty. For many families, it carried the taste of both comfort and necessity, proving that even the humblest foods could make a difference. Celery salt and butter sandwiches may sound outdated now, but in the 1950s they stood proudly as proof of survival on a shoestring budget. Elvis Presley wasn't the only one who loved a peanut butter and bacon sandwich. The combo of crispy, salty bacon and creamy, rich peanut butter created a high-protein, energy-packed sandwich that was a favorite for anyone in need of a quick and filling meal. It's easy to see why this sandwich caught on. It balanced savory and sweet, crunchy and creamy. The bacon gave it that satisfying crunch, while the peanut butter added a smooth richness. It wasn't the healthiest option, but when you're working with a tight budget and even tighter food supplies, it was a treat that gave you the energy to keep going. Not only was this a cheap meal, but it was also indulgent in a way that made you forget about how hard times really were. The combination of these 2 ingredients might have seemed strange, but it worked, and it worked well. But if you're craving something a little lighter, something that came before the age of bacon and peanut butter, the next sandwich on our list might be just what you need. Sandwich. While both pickles and peanut butter are popular choices for bread-based goodness nowadays, there was once a time when people mixed the pickles into the peanut butter to make a sandwich. Around the 1970s, the peanut butter and pickle sandwiches really started taking off, particularly dill pickles. Something about the spice and tang of a pickle added a lot of character to a basic peanut butter sandwich. It helped that a sandwich loaded with vegetables was always more filling. On a budget or on an energetically challenged day where you cannot get yourself out of bed, this sandwich worked wonders for the masses. We definitely want this one back in lunchboxes and fridges in many states like the good old days. Pickled beet sandwiches brought both color and tang to the plain bread that housewives had to stretch as far as possible. Beets were cheap, easy to preserve, and often pickled in jars to last through long months when fresh produce was not available. Thin slices of pickled beets layered between bread gave a bright vinegary bite that stood out among otherwise plain meals. They bled their purple-red color into the bread, making the sandwich as striking as it was thrifty. Many families enjoyed this because it provided vegetables in a form that could last, while also adding acidity that made the meal taste fresher. Sometimes a thin spread of butter was added to soften the sharpness, but often the beets stood alone. Children were not always fond of the sour flavor, but adults appreciated the practicality. It was simple, filling, and dependable, which were the key qualities of a working family's lunch. Pickled beet sandwiches may not appear today at lunch tables, yet in the 1950s they were a proud example of turning preserved vegetables into survival food. Sometimes a quick and simple solution was needed when the month's budget was running low. Enter the cold hot dog slices and ketchup sandwich. This sandwich was made with leftover hot dogs, sliced cold, and slathered with ketchup between slices of bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. After payday, people might have splurged on hot dogs, but by the end of the week, those leftovers would be repurposed into this quick fix. The cold hot dog slices were nothing more than a vehicle for the ketchup, but when combined with bread, it made a satisfying snack or lunch. There wasn't much finesse to it, but it worked. It might not win any culinary awards, but when you've got limited resources, you make do with what you have. And while this sandwich may seem like an odd pairing, it's definitely one you'd want to try if you're in need of a last-minute meal. However, if you're craving something a little heartier, the next sandwich might just be what you're looking for. Olives might not make a comeback anytime soon in today's world, but they will return on the list with egg and olive sandwiches. Like we said, olives were starting to get really hot as the ideal sandwich topping. Adaptable, flexible, and cheap is all you want out of an accessory to your sandwich. Like those fancy earrings that go perfect with your dress, olives and eggs went together like a Cupid-certified match made in heaven. People went wild around the mid-1970s for hard-boiled eggs and salted olives in their sandwich, green or black. Black olives got a bit more traction with eggs though, whereas greens synergized better with peanut butter. Would you ever try a sandwich that consists only of an egg and a fruit? By the way, you did know olives are fruits, right? Canned peach and whipped olio sandwiches reflected the blend of convenience and necessity that defined many 1950s kitchens. Margarine, often called olio, was cheaper than butter and spread easily, while canned peaches provided sweetness and a taste of fruit when fresh options were unavailable. Housewives mashed peaches into the margarine, whipping the mixture into a spreadable paste that was both bright and filling. Pressed between slices of white bread, it became a sandwich that looked cheerful and tasted indulgent, even though it was entirely practical. The syrup from the peaches seeped into the bread, making it soft and sweet, while the olio gave it richness. This sandwich carried the feeling of a treat, even though it was born from rationing and limited budgets. Families appreciated how far one can of peaches could stretch when turned into spread, especially when children craved something sweet. Canned peach and whipped olio sandwiches may sound strange today, but they once represented both thrift and comfort in equal measure. In the summer, when tomatoes were in season and fresh produce was at its peak, tomato and sugar sandwiches became a beloved choice. Thick slices of juicy, ripe tomatoes, sprinkled with sugar, were placed between slices of bread. It might sound odd, but the sweetness of the sugar balanced the tang of the tomatoes, making it an unexpectedly delicious combo. Some people even added a little mayonnaise to the mix for extra creaminess. This sandwich became a perfect treat, often eaten barefoot on the porch in the warmth of summer. It was simple and sweet, a perfect way to enjoy the bounty of the season without spending much. While it was certainly a summertime favorite, this combo is one of those meals that people today may never quite understand. But if you think this sweet and savory duo is odd, the next sandwich is even more unconventional. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you slice them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. Celery, leaf, and mayonnaise sandwiches showed the frugality of 1950s kitchens where nothing was wasted. Celery stalks were often used for cooking, but the leaves, which many might throw away today, became a valuable part of thrifty meals. Housewives would chop the leaves finely, stir them into mayonnaise, and spread the mixture generously across bread slices. The flavor was bright, and slightly bitter, balanced by the creaminess of the mayo. It was not fancy, but it offered crunch and freshness when vegetables were scarce. This sandwich carried pride because it proved how resourceful a homemaker could be, feeding her family with what others would call scraps. Served cold, it made for a quick lunch that carried a surprising burst of green flavor. It fit perfectly into the mentality of stretching every ingredient as far as it could go. Celery leaf and mayonnaise sandwiches are nearly forgotten today, but in the 1950s they were both practical and symbolic of the determination not to waste. For those who grew up eating them, they carried the taste of survival and careful economy. Those kitchens went quiet one by one. If even one of these tasted familiar, say so below.